Welcome back to Not Quite My Tempo with Chris. Today we're talking about the next DC film that just released, Supergirl. James Gunn's DCU continues. This is the second film in the universe after Gunn's directed Superman film came out last summer. Directed by Craig Gillespie, Kara Zor-El, aka Supergirl, played by Millie Alcock, joins forces with an unlikely companion on an interstellar journey of vengeance and justice when an unexpected adversary strikes too close to home. I was quite excited for this movie. I haven't seen the Supergirl film from the 80s, but I've really heard nothing but bad things. So getting a modern Supergirl film and the decent trailers had me down for this project. He didn't direct this film, but Gunn is overseeing this DC universe, and I love his films, including his Superman film, so I'm rooting for this DC universe and to get some great standalone films that also tie into a cohesive universe and overall story. The promise of that and Gunn's past work have me hopeful. Now, while this film is somewhat enjoyable, it's also flawed and stale in many ways and was a bit of a letdown as the next film in this universe. So this is an interesting film in the DCU for it being in such an early stage. It's the first project not directed by James Gunn. Of course, he's the overseer of this universe, the sort of Kevin Feige figure. He has input on these projects and script approval and all that. But Craig Gillespie is the director of this film, so it's kind of seeing how a film under Gunn is when he's in this more overseer role of it, not directing it himself and not as much into the nitty-gritty of the project, letting another director have their freedom while still guiding and overseeing. And a big thing when the first trailer came out was that it looked very James Gunn-like and a lot like Guardians of the Galaxy, and I was never really on board with that as a criticism. I liked that it looked very different from Superman, and I liked that Kara seemed to be a very different character from Clark, and that they'd be going into her backstory. And the film, in a few ways, some ways good, some ways bad, has that sort of space adventure vibe of Guardians of the Galaxy for sure. To start with some good, I enjoyed the expansion of the cosmic side of the DC universe here. Just setting-wise, this is a very different film from James Gunn's Superman. Kara is in space, going to different planets. It takes place in the seedy criminal underworld of the cosmic DCU. There's space pirates, outlaws, shady bars, and hangouts. You sort of get that vibe of the Star Wars criminal underworld and Guardians of the Galaxy. None of these planets, or even the underworld as a whole, is very deep or developed. There's not one planet that really sticks out. But I generally enjoy this kind of crime world setting that differentiates it a little bit from the setting of Superman. These do feel like two different films. And with taking place in this darker part of the world, this film starts off much less hopeful and colorful as the city of Metropolis, where Superman is this very optimistic person. Kara is a very different character from Clark, and I appreciated some of the exploration of her backstory, why her different circumstances in her upbringing led her to have a different outlook on life than Clark, and the journey she goes on to deal with all that. Millie Alcock was really strong here. Kara as a character can be fun with her sarcasm and a bit of dry sense of humor, but the depiction of her depression and this sort of rut she's in, feeling this sense of loss and not really knowing her place. Millie Alcock plays us all really well. The character is fun and tough, but the sense of sadness and loss she has gets you invested in her pretty quickly at the start of the film. She has a good heart and does care about people. There's an incident at the start of the film that really effectively shows her good nature, and this idea of her being a caring person that, as much as she tries, can't sit by and let bad things happen. She has the good nature of Clark, but also a more complicated backstory that makes her have a different attitude towards life at the start of the film. They both have been affected by the destruction of Krypton and being forced to leave their homes, but the backstory that the film goes into for her is a compelling way to show why she would be so different from Clark. Not minimizing what Clark went through with losing his homeworld and the complicated relationship he has with it and his biological parents, but it adds to the lore of the world of the DCU and Krypton and makes the relationship with Kara and Clark interesting as well. David Cornsweet is in this film as Superman for just the perfect role and amount of screen time. He doesn't overshadow things, he's just there at points as an important person in Kara's life as his older cousin on Earth that she has a bond with. Cornsweet scenes have some amazing moments of classic Superman hope and optimism, and the scenes with Clark and Kara really develop their relationship and help show Kara's character arc and growth in some of these scenes. So getting this backstory and expansion of the world of the DCU was pretty strong in this film. I enjoy the criminal underworld aesthetic and setting, but this film also falls short in many ways and ends up being mostly generic and stale. When it comes to the story of this film, there's just not enough unique here, and the film is soaked in the modern blockbuster tropes and vibes that makes it really bland at points. The space adventure aspect is fun, but so played out. There's a really basic setup that leads to Kara meeting some okay side characters, and they grow closer on this adventure together. You kind of see the character arcs and where they're going from very early on, and it feels like we've seen it before and better. Some themes of revenge and trauma that come about in the story sort of tie to Kara's backstory in a meaningful way, but it's mostly forced and lacks emotional punch. The villain here is also incredibly mediocre. This universe started off with an amazing villain in Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, and this second film takes a huge dip in villain quality with a character with nothing to him. There is nothing to get invested in or anything interesting about him when he's on screen. The only kind of cool thing about him is his creepy look, but just don't ask me his name. And it's also kind of tough because this villain and what he's done is driving a lot of the story here. And there is an incident early in the film that gives Kara some personal involvement in the plot and getting this guy, but the character is introduced with very little to him, and as you go along the story, they had nothing else, a villain just lacking interesting motivation or character. Another big drawback to this film, the action is not great. There's a few cool powering up moments with her using her laser eyes and stuff like that, some excitement when the music kicks in and everything, but for the most part, it's extremely basic and lifeless action with her doing a lot of superpowered punching and kicking. The mix of her Kryptonian powers and all she can do with these abilities, with really strong visual potential for dynamic action, are very sparsely used here. The punching and kicking and her throwing dudes around has very little excitement to it. There's also some metal weapons like axes and stuff like that. She gets her hands on a few of those at some points, but even then I don't really want straight up weapon action from a Kryptonian character, even if it is different from Superman. There is a certain kind of action you want from a character in the Super family, and unfortunately I was not happy with the quality of the action sequences here. There's also tons of visual noise at points with too many exploding things happening at once, and no weight to them, especially in the third act. And there's some green screen that looks unusually bad at points, and some visuals that really took me out of it. Story-wise too, getting near the third act, there's a stretch that drags where things really slow down for what feels like too much time. This movie isn't very long, but it felt a little longer to me than it was. That's not a very good sign. Talking about some of the other side characters here too, one of the big ones announced for this movie was Jason Momoa returning to DC, not as Aquaman, but as Lobo, who is a character from the comics I'm very unfamiliar with, but according to everyone who is, Momoa is perfect casting, and this character is very massive, barbaric, and a little sarcastic, and I can see why Momoa and fans wanted this casting to happen. He was a lot of fun at points. But he's also a character that feels unnaturally incorporated into the plot. I could have used more from him, he just feels kinda there at points when I wanted him to feel more involved. Still, a good introduction to this character that I hope we get more from. So Supergirl does some good stuff in really introducing Kara Zor-El with a tough, fun, and often emotional performance from Millie Alcock. The film expands the cosmic side of the DCU and builds some compelling backstory and Kryptonian lore that adds dimension to this character and the world. But the story and action feel lifeless and stale. The themes of revenge and grief are poorly incorporated, and the film feels very mediocre and empty in many ways. This doesn't have me too worried about the future of this franchise. Not every movie is going to knock it out of the park. This film isn't a disaster, but it is lackluster and could have been so much better. They have a strong character and performance with Kara and Millie Alcock that I'm excited to see more from. Going forward with these films, some more effort in having a script that isn't so tropey and doesn't feel like a lot of other blockbusters and comic book movies would be appreciated. I'm still hoping for a great DC universe here, but there is room for improvement still. As a film, I would recommend you see this if you're interested in the DCU, enjoy comic book movies. It has fun there to offer, but it's also extremely familiar and has flaws. I give Supergirl a 76 out of 100. That's going to be it for me today on Not Quite My Tempo with Chris. I'll be back very soon with some more movie talk. Until then, enjoy.